You walk out to the tomato plant in your garden and something immediately looks wrong. The new growth is curled. There's a sticky film on the leaves. You look closer and there they are. Hundreds of them. Tiny, soft-bodied, motionless, all clustered on every stem, every bud, every new shoot. Aphids. Your reaction is something between disgust and fury. Here's the thing, aphids hit your plants at the worst possible time. Right when the plant is doing well, right when it looks like this season might actually work out, and suddenly, there they are, taking over. Let's face it, aphids create a lot of problems for gardeners. That sticky residue coating leaves on your plants is their waste product. Within a few days of an aphid colony settling in, a black fungus called sooty mold starts growing on top of it. So now your plant looks like it's diseased on top of everything else. Meanwhile, the aphids are feeding by inserting needle-like mouthparts directly into the plant's phloem tissue and drawing out the sugary sap. Actively growing tips get distorted. Flower buds abort. Young fruits stay small or drop. And if the aphid colony is large enough and left alone long enough, the plant starts to look completely exhausted. There's one more thing about aphid damage that most home gardeners don't know about, and it's the most serious one. Many aphid species carry plant viruses. When an aphid feeds, its mouthpiece picks up whatever virus is present in the plant tissue, and when it moves to a new plant and begins feeding again, it deposits that virus into the new host. Cucumber mosaic virus, potato virus Y, turnip mosaic virus. Many of the most damaging plant diseases that home gardeners encounter are spread by aphids, not by weather, not by soil, not by tools, by aphids moving from plant to plant. A plant with an aphid infestation isn't just being weakened by sap feeding. In many cases, it's being exposed to disease that will cause problems long after the aphids themselves are gone. But the thing that gets under most gardeners' skin isn't just the damage, it's how fast it happens. You can go from a clean plant on Monday to a completely infested one by Friday. And that's not an exaggeration. A small aphid population can double in size in under 2 days under the right conditions. You'll come back from a long weekend and feel like you've walked into a different garden. And because aphids are so small, many species are under 2 millimeters, they're often hard to spot until the problem is already significant. By the time the leaves are curling and the honeydew is visible, you're not dealing with a few pioneers, you're dealing with an established colony. They also hide on the undersides of leaves, particularly in the early stages, which means a plant can look fine from above while being colonized below. People reach for the spray almost immediately, and that's understandable because the spray feels like control. It feels like doing something. But before you do that, let's talk about what actually works. Because the spray is, for reasons that will take a few minutes to fully explain, usually the wrong first move. Here's what to do the moment you find aphids. The very first thing, and before anything else, is a strong blast of cold water from the garden hose, aimed directly at the colony, stem by stem, underside of every leaf. This sounds too simple to work and people dismiss it, but it's documented by multiple university extension programs as one of the most effective immediate interventions for aphid colonies. Aphids grip plant tissue with those needle-like mouthparts, and once a strong spray dislodges them, they can't climb back. They're gone. They land in the soil and they stay there. It won't eliminate a severe infestation overnight, but as a first strike on a colony you've just found, water is faster and more effective than most gardeners give it credit for. Do this early in the morning. You want the plant to dry during the day rather than sitting wet overnight, which creates its own problems. The second thing to do is check your nitrogen levels. Aphids are drawn to soft, fast-growing plant tissue, and the primary driver of that soft new growth is excess nitrogen. Over-fertilizing with a high nitrogen fertilizer, especially synthetic ones, is one of the most reliable ways to make your plants more attractive to aphids. University of California IPM research is explicit on this. Plants receiving too much nitrogen produce excessive soft growth and become significantly more susceptible to aphid attack. If you're seeing repeated aphid problems on the same plant season after season, look at your fertilizing routine before anything else. A plant growing at its natural rate without nitrogen-driven flushes is simply less appealing. Third, Look for the mummies. If you see aphids that appear swollen, brownish, and papery looking, different from the live green or yellow ones, leave those ones completely alone. They're already dead from the inside. A tiny parasitic wasp has laid its egg inside them, the larva has been developing, and the aphid casing has become a nursery. These swollen brown husks are called aphid mummies, and each one eventually hatches a wasp that will go looking for more aphids to parasitize. If you spray and kill a plant covered in mummies, you've eliminated a free, self-deploying pest control system that was already doing the work for you. Fourth, plant companions that bring in reinforcements. Dill, fennel, yarrow, sweet alyssum, and cilantro left to flower all attract the adult stages of parasitic wasps and hoverflies. Those adults need nectar and pollen as food sources before they lay their eggs. A garden with those plants nearby will have a far more established population of beneficial insects than one without them, and that population will respond to aphid colonies faster and more thoroughly than any spray you can apply. The timing of these companion plants matters more than most people realize. Parasitic wasps and hoverflies need nectar sources from early spring before your main crops are flowering. If the only flowers in your garden appear in summer, you've missed the window to establish a beneficial insect population early in the season. Sweet alyssum sown directly in early spring, fennel allowed to overwinter and bolt early, dill planted before the tomatoes go in. These are the things that get beneficial insects into your garden before the first aphid colony takes hold, rather than hoping they arrive after the problem is already established. Now, there's a fifth thing, and it's the most important one. But before I tell you what it is, you need to understand what's actually happening in your garden when aphids show up, because the aphid story is a lot stranger than most people realize, and the fifth tip only makes sense once you've seen the full picture. Here's why this matters. Most of the advice about aphid control treats the problem as a simple equation. Aphids are bad, spray kills aphids, therefore spray solves the problem. But if that were true, aphid infestations wouldn't be something every gardener deals with season after season, often on the same plants, often getting worse after treatment rather than better. The spray approach doesn't fail because the chemistry doesn't work. It fails because it's attacking the symptom while leaving the cause untouched. And to understand what the actual cause is, you need to understand three things about aphids that most people never get told. You need to understand how they reproduce, you need to understand how they communicate, and you need to understand who's protecting them. Let's start with the aphid itself. There are roughly 5,000 described species of aphid worldwide, and about 450 of those are considered significant pests of food crops and ornamental plants. Different species specialize on specific plants. Rose aphids on roses, black bean aphids on beans and beets, woolly apple aphids on apple trees, melon aphids on cucurbits, tobacco aphids on peppers. Most of the time, the aphid you find on your roses is not the same species you'd find on your tomatoes. They're specialists, which is one reason controlling them with generalist pesticides creates more problems than it solves. The feeding mechanism is worth understanding because it's not random chewing. An aphid locates a plant using a combination of chemical signals and visual cues, and then uses a structure called a stylet, a flexible needle thinner than a human hair, to probe the plant tissue. It navigates between cells rather than breaking them, following chemical gradients toward the phloem vessels, where the sugary sap flows under pressure. Once it reaches the phloem, it barely needs to do anything. The plant's own hydraulic pressure pushes the sap into the aphid's gut. The aphid sits there, locked in, feeding passively, while the plant essentially pumps food into it. The excess sugar the aphid can't use gets excreted as honeydew. A single aphid is a minor nuisance. A colony of several hundred is dropping enough honeydew to coat a leaf in hours. But the part of aphid biology that explains why your infestation went from small to enormous in a single week is the reproduction. Aphids don't reproduce the way most insects do. For most of spring and summer, every aphid you see is female. There are no males, and these females are are not laying eggs, they are giving birth to live nymphs. Each nymph is a genetic clone of the mother, born ready to feed and born with developing embryos already inside it. An aphid is born pregnant, not metaphorically, not as a shorthand, literally, structurally, biologically pregnant, carrying its own developing daughters before it has even taken its first meal. This is called telescoping of generations. A female aphid contains a daughter that contains a granddaughter, 3 generations stacked inside a single living body. The research that established this comes directly from aphid reproductive biology studies at multiple institutions, and the numbers that emerge from it are striking. Under warm conditions, the time from birth to first reproduction can be as short as 7 days. A single female can produce up to 12 live nymphs per day at peak rates. Given 10 days and a suitable host plant with no predator intervention, a single founding female can give rise to several hundred living descendants. Given 3 weeks, the numbers move into the thousands. This reproductive strategy has a specific seasonal logic. Throughout spring and summer, the aphid population remains entirely or almost entirely female, reproducing clonally and at maximum speed. As days shorten in late summer and autumn, something in the colony's biology shifts. The reproductive signals change. Males appear for the first and only time in the annual cycle. Females begin laying eggs rather than giving birth to live young. Those eggs are cold hardy, able to survive freezing temperatures, and they overwinter on plant tissue to hatch the following spring, and the cycle starts again from a new founding female. The fall generation of eggs is also the reason aphid problems on perennial plants and shrubs can feel like they never go away. The overwintering eggs are tiny and nearly invisible against bark and woody stems. They hatch in early spring precisely when the plant is producing its first flush of soft, new growth. By the time you're noticing a problem in May or June, you may be looking at the 3rd or 4th generation of the season. There's also an escape mechanism built into the colony's biology. When an aphid is attacked by a predator, by a parasitic wasp, by physical damage, it releases a chemical signal called E-beta-farnesene. This is the aphid alarm pheromone, and it's one of the most studied defense signals in insect ecology. The moment it's released, nearby aphids stop feeding. They kick their legs, they drop from the plant, they scatter. A colony under attack can evacuate a stem within seconds, and if predator pressure remains high, the colony's reproductive biology shifts. Within 1 or 2 generations, the female nymphs born into an environment with high alarm pheromone exposure start developing wings. Not all of them, but enough. Winged aphids disperse to new plants, colonize fresh tissue, and start new clonal populations elsewhere in your garden before you've dealt with the original infestation. The aphid has 2 backup plans already deployed before you found it. The winged morph is worth understanding on its own terms, because it changes how you should think about the relationship between different plants in your garden. When alarm pheromone levels in a colony stay high, meaning predator presence is sustained, the females start producing daughters with wings instead of daughters without them. These winged aphids don't stay on the original plant. They fly. They find new plants, often ones nearby that share favorable conditions, and they establish fresh colonies. What this means practically is that treating one severely infested plant aggressively while ignoring the rest of the garden often just moves the problem rather than solving it. The colony you attacked dispersed before you finished. The next infestation appears on the plant 2 meters away. Now let's talk about what's been happening in the weeks before you notice the problem, because there's a very good chance your aphids weren't alone. Look at the base of the plant. If you see ants moving in a column toward the stems, stopping near the aphid colonies, and then moving back down, those ants are not incidental. They are actively managing the aphid colony. The relationship between ants and aphids is one of the most studied examples of mutualism in entomology, and it's been documented in hundreds of species across multiple ant genera. Ants are drawn to honeydew as a carbohydrate source, but they don't just collect it passively. Worker ants stroke the abdomen of aphids with their antennae. to stimulate honeydew release. They are actively milking the aphids, triggering excretion on demand. The arrangement goes deeper than simple opportunism. Some ant species have developed such a committed relationship with specific aphid colonies that they show clear preference for certain aphid genotypes over others based on the quality and sugar concentration of the honeydew those aphids produce. They're choosing better producing livestock. Research published in Current Biology has shown that ants distinguish between different clones of the same aphid species based on honeydew composition alone and preferentially tend the more productive ones. The ants are selecting for production traits in their herd. This is not a casual scavenging relationship. It's a long-term, actively managed agricultural system. In return for the honeydew, the ants provide security. They patrol the colony continuously, attacking anything that comes near. If a ladybird beetle lands on a stem where aphids are feeding, the ants mob it. If a parasitic wasp attempts to approach an aphid to lay its egg, the ants intercept it and throw it from the plant. Researchers studying this interaction have documented ants physically grasping parasitic wasps and dropping them from stems repeatedly, preventing them from completing their parasitization. One study found that parasitic wasps can actually smell the chemical residue left by ants on a plant's surface and will avoid colonized aphid groups entirely, even when the ants are no longer present. The ants have, in effect, created a chemical no-fly zone around their livestock, and they do consider the aphids to be livestock. Some ant species move aphids to fresh plant growth when the current feeding site becomes depleted, carrying them in their mandibles to better forage. Some species overwinter aphid eggs inside their own nests, bringing them out in spring and transporting them to appropriate host plants. Ants have been observed removing fungal infections from aphid colonies and grooming individual aphids to keep them healthy. The relationship between certain ant species and their aphids is not casual or opportunistic. It's been running long enough in enough species pairs that it constitutes a fully developed agricultural system. While all of this is happening, the beneficial insects you're hoping will save your garden, the ladybugs, the lacewings, the parasitic wasps, are being systematically blocked. The ladybug that lands on your rose stem and finds ants patrolling it does not have a good time. The parasitic wasp that detects ant scent on the plant turns around and finds another target. What looks from a distance like a straightforward aphid problem is actually a protected operation, with ants functioning as security, the aphids functioning as producers, and your plant functioning as the farm. Let's talk about what those beneficial insects actually do when they can access the colony, because understanding this is what makes the fifth tip make sense. The parasitic wasps, the most important and least glamorous players in this entire story, are tiny. Many are smaller than the aphids they parasitize. The species most commonly associated with garden aphid control, Aphidius colemanni and related species, look nothing like the wasps you think of when you imagine a wasp. No yellow stripes, no visible threat. They land on the aphid colony, select an individual, and insert their ovipositor to lay a single egg inside the living aphid's body. The aphid continues to feed and live normally, with no outward sign of what's been done to it. The wasp egg hatches and the larva begins feeding on the aphid's internal tissues. The aphid dies when the larva pupates inside it. The empty aphid shell hardens and turns brown, puffing slightly. That's the mummy you learned to recognize earlier. Eventually the pupal case splits, and a new adult wasp emerges ready to parasitize more aphids. A single parasitic wasp can parasitize hundreds of aphids across its lifetime. And unlike a ladybug that eats one aphid at a time, each parasitized aphid becomes a factory for another wasp. The math compounds the other way. Every aphid the wasp reaches doesn't just die, it generates another hunter. Lacewings work differently. The adult lacewing is a delicate green-winged insect that feeds on nectar and pollen. It looks completely harmless and unrelated to pest control, but the lacewing larva, which hatches from those distinctive tiny eggs on silken threads that people sometimes mistake for fungal growth, is an aggressive predator that can consume 200 to 400 aphids across its larval development. Lacewing larvae are sometimes called aphid lions. Once they're present in a colony, they're relentless, and unlike the wasps, they don't require direct contact with individual aphids to cause widespread disruption. The ladybug that you're waiting to rescue your garden is, in many cases, not absent. It can smell the aphid colony. It knows the food is there, but it also knows the ants are there, and the risk-reward calculation sends it elsewhere. This is why buying ladybugs from a garden center and releasing them rarely works as well as people hope. Commercially sold ladybugs are collected from wild overwintering aggregations, packed, refrigerated, and shipped. When they're released onto a plant, they're disoriented, dehydrated, and lacking the environmental cues that would normally tell them this is a good place to settle and lay eggs. Many of them fly immediately, and research shows the dispersal happens within hours of release. The ones that stay may find the aphids, but also find the ants and leave anyway. The problem isn't the ladybug, the problem is the ant protection the aphid colony already has. Which brings us to the fifth thing: control the ants. If you have ants running up and down the stems of your aphid-infested plants, that is the intervention point. Not the aphids directly. The ants. A physical barrier like tanglefoot applied to a band of tape wrapped around the stem creates a sticky obstacle ants can't cross. This one change, removing the ant protection from the aphid colony, is documented to allow parasitic wasp and ladybug populations to do their work effectively. Published research has found that removing ant access to aphid colonies results in significantly faster natural biological control than any comparable intervention that leaves the ants in place. Without ant protection, the parasitic wasps can reach the colony. Without protection, aphids exposed to ladybugs cannot rely on ants for rescue. Within a week to 10 days of removing ant access, aphid colonies on plants where natural predators are present typically decline substantially without a single spray. That's the fifth tip: not a product, not a spray. Stop the ants, open the door, and let the system that was already trying to help you actually do its job. A few things worth knowing about what comes next. Removing ant access doesn't produce overnight results. It takes a week to 10 days, sometimes 2 weeks, for the biological control agents to work through a colony. This is the hardest part for most gardeners because the aphids are still visible during that window, and the instinct to spray is strong. Resist it. Spraying a plant where parasitic wasps are working will eliminate the wasp population along with the aphids, and the aphids will recover from a pesticide application far faster than the beneficial insect populations will. You'll end up in a worse position after spraying than before. There are situations where a pesticide application is actually appropriate, a severe infestation on a plant that's being visibly damaged, with no ant activity suggesting biological control is being blocked, and no evidence of mummies or lacewing eggs present. In those cases, insecticidal soap or neem oil, both of which break down quickly and don't leave residue that poisons incoming beneficial insects, are reasonable tools. A broad-spectrum synthetic insecticide is almost always the wrong choice for aphids because its residue persists long after the aphids are gone, and it eliminates the beneficial insect population that would prevent the next infestation. The garden that gets aphids the least and recovers from them fastest when it does is the garden with the most diverse insect population, companion plants that flower continuously, minimal synthetic pesticide use, and whenever you see ants marching toward an aphid colony, an ant barrier that opens the space to every other creature that was waiting for the chance to get in. If you've had aphids this season and want to tell me what you tried, what worked, and what spectacularly didn't, drop it in the comments down below. Subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you on the next one.